Welcome to the final part of my report on my recent GTCS case. This one's punishing process and hollow victory. So a great victory for freedom of speech for teachers. Well, not really. Let's see what's happened. The process is the punishment. You say something that doesn't fit with the sort of secular progressive agenda, and you're subjected to an almost 3-year process. Throughout this process, virtually every stage GTCS dealt with was late one way or another. I got fed up of hearing who was on holiday, who was on leave. Oh, I'm sorry, this wasn't quite on time. Oh, sorry, it's a bit late. And then it's internal little saying, oh, it's fine, don't worry. But eventually I got to the point where I said to them, I really don't want to hear any more about who's on holiday and who's ill. Can you just get this done? Now, if they're saying they're too busy, if they're overwhelmed with cases, my tip would be stop pursuing ridiculous cases like mine. Then maybe you'd have enough time to deal with the real issues where teachers are unfit to teach. But here's some more aspects of the process that's, well, just see what you think of these. When the allegation was first put to me, I got a document that said something like, a complaint's been received saying that you made prejudiced and discriminatory comments. What have you got to say for yourself? I mean, what am I supposed to say to that? I mean, I make like 6 prejudiced and discriminatory comments before breakfast some days. That was a joke, by the way, just in case anyone's watching. That's a joke. It's a joke because I don't really make 6 prejudiced and discriminatory comments. I might make 6 comments that some people might think are prejudiced and discriminatory. So I didn't even know what the complaint was about. To be honest, I had a pretty good idea. But I'd look pretty stupid, wouldn't I, if I launched into a defence saying, oh yes, it was all about this. And then they said, oh no, it wasn't that. It was about something else. So fancy putting to me an allegation without even telling me what it was referring to. I mean, later on in the process, they gave me the allegations. Their lawyer produced the charges against me. Then I had to write my defence. So I wrote my defence and submitted it. Then they said, we'd like to have another go at writing the allegations, please. In other words, modesty aside, I mean, I feel that I sort of demolished their allegations to such an extent that they realised there was no point going to a hearing because they got no chance. So they had another try at writing their allegations, which I thought was very irregular, shall we say. Another thing that happened is coronavirus restrictions. They need to have the hearings online, which shouldn't be that difficult, should it? But anyway, in August 2020, they passed a motion or something or other, agreeing that hearings could be held online. And I'd already been pressing, come on, let's get on with this. Then it got to November, so they agreed in August, got to November. I said, how's the online hearing progressing? When's it going to be? They said, oh, we're planning on making the application soon. So they hadn't even filled the little form in within GTCS to apply for an online hearing. So I said to them, please send the form to me. I'll fill it in for you. And they did. So I had to help them to arrange my own hearing because they couldn't get around to filling a little form in. So I filled the form in, sent it, then it got considered by a panel. And the panel came back saying, we're not sure if we can have an online hearing or not. And they gave 2 reasons. Just listen to this. The first reason was they weren't sure if they could play videos on Microsoft Teams. I mean, come on, can you imagine an organisation that can't sort that out within 5 minutes of like a search on Google or ask your IT guy or whatever? But anyway, that was one of the reasons. They weren't sure if they could play videos on Teams. The other reason was in my application I said, this is urgent. We're going on for almost 3 years. This is urgent. And they said, you said it's urgent. We don't know why it's urgent. Can you please explain to us why it's urgent? You can imagine how I replied to that. So anyway, this one malicious complaint cost me literally well over 100 hours of my time, having to write dozens of pages of defence. I've spoken to lawyers at various points. The number of emails that have gone backwards and forwards, absolutely unbelievable. This hearing itself took up a week. Get a massive chunk out of my life. My defence in this case, I submitted it, not too differently than I presented it last week. 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I gave them the arguments that 2 years later, they said, okay, well, the panel said, okay, we think those arguments are right, I assume, and they let me off. Another thing through this almost 3 years of investigation, if I'd have applied for a teaching job within that 3 years, I would have had to declare this investigation. So let's say a little part-time job would come up at Fettes College, say, and I thought, oh, that'd be quite good. So if I'd applied, I would have to put on my form or in my letter or whatever, by the way, I'm currently under investigation by GTCS for making prejudiced, intolerant and discriminatory remarks. What chance have you got of getting a job under those circumstances? How about 0? So as it happened, I wasn't trying to get a teaching job within that 3 years. If I had have been, then it would have been virtually impossible, I suggest. So in someone else's case, that's what GTCS would do to someone in these circumstances. Add to that, the police got involved, as I talked about before. Now, the staff at my former school, the deputy head spoke at the hearing. Again, he was saying basically that my views were very concerning. The former headmaster of my former school, he outright said I should be struck off. He said I shouldn't be in a classroom until I've recanted of my views. Now, I said to the panel, when you're hearing the testimony of school staff in this situation, it's a bit like this. It's a bit like if you imagine the inquisitors burning a heretic at the stake, and there's a crowd watching. So the heretic's there screaming in the flames, and they go to the crowd and say, right, what do you think? Do you agree with him? I mean, not many people are going to say, yeah, I do actually. That's what I think too. Virtually everyone's going to say, oh, no. I think what he said was absolutely terrible. Deserves all he gets. Just leave me alone. So I said to GTCS, you can't regard the testimony of these school staff as independent accounts, because they're under pressure to agree with you, because they fear what would happen to them if they disagreed. And I think that's true. If they'd have said to GTCS, we really don't see what the problem is. This is just valid freedom of speech. It's a perfectly reasonable view. What's the problem? They would have been terrified. So I said to the panel, you can't regard them as independent witnesses. Whether they took that on board or not, I don't know. So victory for freedom of speech? Not really. Not really. There's no teacher in Scotland who's now going to be thinking, oh, great, I can stand up and say what I believe now. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So why did they end up dismissing all of the allegations? Well, that's an interesting question. Some people have said, were GTCS scared? Did they realise the controversy that this was generating? The support that I was getting, potentially, as well. And did they think, well, let's just avoid getting ourselves in hot water here? Now, the idea of the hearing, the way it's structured, is GTCS presented the case. GTCS wanted me to be struck off. They presented the case saying he should be struck off. But they then appoint this sort of semi-independent panel to make the final decision. And it was this panel that rejected the allegations. Now, if it was the case that GTCS thought, look, we're getting into hot water here, and they just had a quiet word with the panel and said, look, just, let's not follow this up. We've gone far enough here. If that happened, that would be very corrupt. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that did happen. I've got no reason to think that did happen. So it is just that the panel made their decision as they did. Now, immediately after the hearing, I initially thought that a technicality had really derailed their case. But on reflection, I decided I don't really think it is that caused the problem. I'll explain this very briefly. Okay, it's not the most fascinating thing to spend 10 minutes explaining, but I'll explain it very, very briefly. In the allegations, it had like number 1, prejudice, number 2, discriminatory, number 3, intolerant, number 4, potentially discriminatory, and then it went on to have a load more text in number 4. And when the lawyer explained the allegations to the panel just before they were going to make the decision, he said that all this extra text that was only in number 4 also applied to 1, 2, and 3. And I said, no, it doesn't. If that's what you meant, then what's on paper is wrong. That's not properly structured. So the lawyer asked their solicitor, and she said, yes, she did mean that the text in number 4 also applied to 1, 2, and 3. So at the time, I didn't think it particularly mattered. Later on, I realised it was very important. I wouldn't even bother explaining the reason. So in the evening, about an hour after the hearing, I emailed them and sent them a corrected version of the allegations, so that the structure of it did reflect what their solicitor was saying it actually meant. Now, initially I thought they got so scared that they'd made such a mess of it that they really needed to give up at that point. It would have been so embarrassing for the next morning to start with me saying, now, if you could just refer to the corrected version of the allegations I've sent to you to reflect what the solicitor said. I mean, that would have been appalling for them. But I actually don't think that's what happened. Because when the lawyer said what advice he'd given the panel, it was nothing to do with that. It was all about take words to mean what they usually mean, etc. So unless the lawyer was completely lying in his legal advice, which I don't believe he was, then the technicality didn't play a part in them rejecting the allegations. So I think what it comes down to is the panel was able to hear me putting my case for the first time, and GTCS's case couldn't stand up under scrutiny. Right, media coverage. There's quite a bit of media coverage for the case so far. We're not finished with it yet, by a long way, I don't think. The Sun and the Mail described my video as a rant, which I thought was very unfair. And clearly they're setting it up so that if I was struck off, people would be more likely to think, oh yeah, it deserves what it gets if he was ranting. One newspaper said that I was being accused of assaulting Ruth Davidson. Whoever did the report confused insulting for assaulting. Now, I think that was actually a very prestigious London-based broadsheet newspaper that made that mistake. But, I mean, I think it might have been the Times, and maybe they corrected it. To be honest, the Times report had almost as many mistakes as it had sentences. It was unbelievable. Anyway, the other interesting thing in the media reports, quite a few of them reported the subtitle of the video. And they said that I said that Ruth Davidson takes the ABM approach to childcare. And they put this in their reports, in the text of their reports. It's like Emperor's New Clothes. As though they're assuming maybe some people knew what that meant. They were a bit embarrassed to say that they didn't realise what it meant. But they probably didn't, because it's a phrase that I've made up myself. The anyone but mum approach to childcare. So you've got these newspapers talking about the ABM approach to childcare as though this is some well-known term that people should understand. Maybe it's going to become a well-known term. We shall see. Now, after the whole thing was done and dusted, we've been talking about this thing, analysing the video, etc. I thought, right, let me just take a step back and reflect on it. Now, some people said they weren't sure it was a good idea to use Ruth Davidson's personal situation as the springboard to approach this issue. Now, I've always thought with that, it wasn't just Ruth Davidson announcing she's having a child and I make a video about it. It was Ruth Davidson announcing she was having a child and saying she hopes other people do the same. So she was articulating her view, and I challenged that. Now, some people still didn't think that was particularly helpful. But we end up with a situation in society where people are allowed to preach with their actions, but you're not allowed to preach with your words. So if someone does something, that can't be criticised. But then if you actually speak the other side of the argument, then that's attacked. So what that creates is a situation that's always going to head in the permissive direction. But the other thing here is that the Scottish Family Party, we have to follow the news cycle to some extent. If I just decide I want to make a video on something and it's just completely out of the blue, it's not going to get the same traction as if you're picking up on something in the news. Now, another example that might be, let's imagine in the future, Boris Johnson and marriage. If I was criticising the Conservative Party and contrasting the Scottish Family Party with the Conservative Party, I'd say we're pro-marriage. If you look at the Conservative Party, they elect Boris Johnson as the leader, who, to say the least, doesn't embody the institution of marriage and the philosophy behind it. I think that's a perfectly valid point to make. I wouldn't say things about their children, but in terms of the decisions that a politician makes in their life, I think they are fair game. Another thing I look back on, there was something I got slightly wrong in the video. There's one bit when I was talking about the research into same-sex parenting. I said the statistics always show worse outcomes for children of same-sex couples. I mean, that's not true. I should have said almost always or most of the time or whatever. But when the solicitor picked up on that, I mean, she clearly had misunderstood it. She thought I was meaning that all children show worse outcomes, where I was meaning that all studies show worse outcomes, but I didn't actually mean that. Almost all studies show worse outcomes. Now, I think with this sort of thing, if you stand up and say something, there's always some people who will say, oh, you shouldn't have quite said it that way. If you just said it differently, if you just said it the way I would have said it, then you would have avoided all these problems. But often the person saying it wouldn't actually say it themselves. But the danger with this sort of case is you end up thinking along the lines of what would have helped my case. Whatever would have made the case a bit easier, you then think, oh, I could have dropped that, should have dropped that bit, should have not said that bit. But at the end of the day, that's not the right way to go. The whole case shouldn't have existed. So, I'm not going to assess what I said on the basis of GTCS's response to it. Now, I'm aware of 2 other cases with GTCS. similar to mine. One of them I've made a video about already. The other one I haven't had any contact with the person, but I'm aware of it. But I'll say if ever you have a case with GTCS of a similar nature, I'll be happy to represent you in the hearing if you'd like me to. Just get in touch. I've sometimes felt over the last few years that there's plenty of people who are willing to wave a gun in my face, but it seems to be quite hard to get anyone to actually pull the trigger. They always seem to want someone else to do the dirty work. And, well, that seemed to play out even when it got to the General Teaching Council for Scotland as well. Now, this last thing is a very important point. I'm not sure this is over yet. I think there might be chapters in the future. Let's see. But just to give you a flavour, I mean, last night, Robin McPherson, who's the head at Robert Gordon's College, independent school in Aberdeen, weighed into the issue. Now, I actually know Robin McPherson. He used to teach at Merkston, where I taught. Nice guy, good teacher. I didn't have a great deal to do with him. The last time I saw him was at his father's funeral. His father was the chaplain at Merkston. Haven't seen him since then. But last night he was basically coming on Twitter saying it was a disgrace that GTCS had let me off instead of striking me off. And he's written an article that's going to be in the Times tomorrow. I mean, riddled with mistakes. He also says that I was accused of assaulting Ruth Davidson. But on Twitter last night, he was encouraging people to write to their MSP to complain that I'd be let off. He said he was going to write to MSPs about it. When I said to him, as I usually do in these situations, will you debate with me? No response to that. Looking at GTCS's statement, they've obviously come under a lot of pressure. I think a lot of people have written to GTCS, contacted them. I bet people like the Equality Network, LGBT Youth Scotland, I bet all these people have been weighing into GTCS saying, what has gone on here? We're not happy, sort this out one way or another. And GTCS seemed almost apologetic yesterday in their statement. Oh, don't blame us, it was the panel, we're still on your side really. We'll get him eventually, it was almost maybe the implication. But when GTCS published their reasons, when the panel publishes its reasons for not upholding the allegations, it'll be interesting to see what GTCS does. I don't know if there's any provision in their procedures to have a retrial, if you like, another hearing. If there is, I wouldn't be at all surprised if that happens. If that doesn't happen, I wouldn't be at all surprised if some new allegations are brought. In fact, maybe even already, some people will have made new allegations to GTCS. And if they haven't already, it could well happen in the future. So let's just see. I'm not sure this is over yet. GTCS, I think, are fuming. I think they're absolutely furious that they're now under this attack from what they consider to be the right side. The people who they want to be mates with are attacking them. And GTCS will think, well, the solution to this is we've got to get in one way or another. So watch this space. Right, something else to watch is I think the little article by Robin McPherson attacking me will be in the Times tomorrow, and my response to it, which is quite pointed. And also I'm going to be on the 9, BBC Scotland, 9 o'clock tomorrow night, Wednesday night. So you could tune in and watch the case being discussed there. But I think that's not over yet. Anyway, thanks for watching. Do join the Scottish Family Party. We really appreciate your support. As I say, I'm not teaching at the moment. And I know we need support so that I can carry on working full-time for the Scottish Family Party. And the best way to support is by joining or by becoming a regular donor. And you can do that via the link below. Thanks for watching.